Every time we've reached an event horizon that has accelerated trends, what have we done in order not only to continue to survive, but to resist? And I think that's what today's lesson, we can learn from the past, and I hope we get into that conversation shortly.
Oh, we about to jump right into that conversation right now. Partially because I think that talking about the past, as we know, Sankofa always lays the groundwork for the future.
Always.
So I know we really wanted to lift up our brother Bob Moses today
Yes.
in our conversation.
Yes.
So I think there are folks out there watching who don't know who Bob Moses is.
No question.
So I would love if you can give us an intro of my guy, Bob Moses.
We should do that. Bob Moses, our brother, our elder, our new ancestor, whose journey began whose initiation into ancestorhood began over the last weekend. One of the things I think I love about Bob Moses, I'll say loved because his contribution echoes, is that one of the reasons we don't know Bob Moses, the name Bob Moses, more is because of the choices Bob Moses made in his life. Bob Moses did not believe in celebrity leadership. And that's not to say that individual human beings don't make outsized contributions to the forward flow of our collective human journey. And Bob Moses was one of those people. But Bob Moses was not about that celebrity life. And we, of course, in Philadelphia knew and know him well. Even with Philadelphia Freedom Schools, and yes, shout out to our Freedom School people. We're in year 21. We're winding towards symposium. I even pulled out the old 1999. It's the original Freedom School joint, the hand drawn joint. Yeah, no question. From 99, back in the day, we're in year 21, and we are in many ways the grandchildren of Bob Moses. Because it was Bob Moses and his comrade, the great Charlie Cobb. In December 1963, Charlie Cobb wrote a memo. The Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee said, let's do these freedom schools. And they met the following year in New York, planned out the curriculum. And coming through the Children's Defense Fund, when we did in 1999 for the first few years, and then Philadelphia Freedom Schools even exceeded the boundaries of the Children's Defense Fund when we said, this is our chance to engage in that liberatory education. And 2 times we got a chance to directly engage with Bob Moses in terms of Philadelphia Freedom Schools, the first being 2002, when we read his book. He and Charlie Cobb wrote a book called Radical Equations, which talks about the history of that student-led movement in 1964 and beyond, the SNCC movement in Mississippi in particular. And then the rest of the book is devoted to the Algebra Project. And I'll run through his bio in just a second to link those things through. And we reached out to him and said, Brother Moses, will you come and have conversation with our young people? We've got several hundred high school students and college students reading this book, and we, every year we pick a book. If the author is alive, we want him to come. And he sent message back. He said, I would love to, but I'm in class. Bob Moses was teaching algebra in Jackson, Mississippi, high school algebra, because he said, this is the gateway to the new Jim Crow in education is algebra. It isn't just reading, writing English. It's going to be the access to the STEM fields, and algebra is going to be the gatekeeper where they cut our people off at the knees, and I'm about to stop it. That's why he started the Algebra Project in 1982. But he sent his comrade, who they had faced death together and faced that struggle together, the great Louisianian Dave Dennis. And Dave Dennis came and spent time with us that summer, walking through Radical Equations. And then Bob Moses and his wife Janet, several years later, did come. We were at the University of Maryland Eastern Shore. And that same year, Randall Robinson came again. He's been several times. And they spent the day with us and part of the night. And every time I saw Bob Moses, including the last time I saw him, which was in the summer of 2019, just before COVID hit, the SNCC veterans, and they are all a very close band, as we know. They came to DC to plan the 60th anniversary conference that they were going to have in person. Now it's going to be virtual coming up this fall. And Bob Moses was who I saw him, who he was every time I saw him. Thoughtful, quiet, maybe the last one to speak if he spoke at all. You ask him a question, he would sit back, look up. Very, very, very calm. And in fact, there's a number of good books. One more recent book called Robert Paris Moses, which is a biography of him. There's a quote from him, and it says, "Who is telling the story that defines the historic truth and accuracy of the story?" This is what Bob Moses says. He says, So there's a character called Bob Moses in many of the history books that discuss Mississippi's civil rights movement in the 1960s. I read about him. I sympathize with him. Sometimes he seems like me. And then sometimes I am confused by him and want to understand him better. That's Bob Moses talking about. But the point he's making is, when we hear about Moses, just like we hear about a lot of the SNCC veterans, two things. Number one, they were young people, like our young people in freedom schools, like our young people around, like the young people in this movement. Number two, when we make them somehow superhuman and dehumanize them, we rob them of their capacity to speak to our possibilities as human beings with all our flaws, and Bob Moses left. He left SNCC after, and in 1965, he said, because I'm getting to be too much the story. We don't need a leader-centered thing. In fact, one of the reasons he came to SNCC, he's from New York, born and raised in New York. His father worked at the 369th Armory. And we know the 369th was the Harlem Hellfighters. So, he was born and raised in Harlem, went to Stuyvesant High School, took a test, got into Stuyvesant, one of the top schools, studied philosophy, studied mathematics when he went to undergraduate school, Hamilton College, upstate New York, in New York. And in Harlem, he encountered Wyatt T. Walker, Bayard Rustin, and he got fascinated with the student movement that was taking place, just beginning to take place in the South. So he asked Bayard Rustin to introduce me to Ella Baker. And it was Bayard Rustin that sent Bob Moses south to meet Ella Baker. And it was Ella Baker who sent Bob Moses to Mississippi, where he hooked up with this local brother named Amzie Moore, who would call himself a race man. And that opened up his world. Because what Bob Moses understood from that moment was, in the words of Ella Baker, the job of an organizer is to put themselves out of a job. Yep. We're not here to tell you what you want. We're here to listen and then figure out how together we can get it. And from that journey, which eventually, of course, led to him being one of the founders of the Council of Federated Organizations in Mississippi. They just unveiled a mural near the campus of Jackson State University at the COFO headquarters with Miss Hamer and not Charlie Cobb, Bob Moses and others. 1964, Freedom Summer. 65, Bob Moses steps back and says, and then I'll wind it to a close with this. He says, I think I'm getting to be too much of the story. Oh, by the way, Bob Moses was 25 years old when he went to Mississippi the first time. He was 26 years old the next year when he came back in 1961 and set up shop, when they said voter registration will be what we use to begin to dismantle this system, not only in Mississippi, but in the South and in the country. He was a little older, in other words, than Charlie Cobb, who was 20 years old when he left Howard University and came south the first time and met his dear friend, who would become his dear friend, Bob Moses. So he was already beyond draft age. That's why I'm mentioning it. Bob Moses then decides, I'm going to Africa. He and his wife Janet went to Africa. 3 of their 4 children born in Africa, in Tanzania. Why? Because the U.S. military drafts him anyway, even though he's beyond draft age. He said, I'm not going to fight in this war. They leave. While he's over there, they start teaching. He eventually ends up in Tanzania in the government, helping design the educational system. By the time he comes back in the mid 70s, because Jimmy Carter is president of the United States and declares blanket amnesty. Anybody who left the country because of the Vietnam War, whatever, amnesty. This is important of electoral politics. Because imagine Ronald Wilson Reagan, the gladiator invader doing that. But I'm sorry, I shouldn't be cussing. I said his full name, so I apologize to anyone out there offended, because I'm deeply offended that it came out of my mouth. But at any rate, what you see is that Moses comes back, and within the decade, by the early 80s, he has started the Algebra Project, because his daughter Maisha is in class. They're in Massachusetts. He's going back to get a PhD in the philosophy of math, because he's a Bob Moses is a natural teacher and an intellectual. So he's in it. He says, my child has already done all this work in this class. Can I just teach her algebra over here in the corner? What ends up being Bob Moses going to the school saying, can I teach my daughter, ends up being him teaching her and a few others, ends up being the beginning in 1982 of the Algebra Project. Because what Bob Moses says is, this is the next barrier they're going to throw up against us. And so from there to the end of his life, between the Algebra Project, the Young People's Project, and these initiatives, Bob Moses understood that you grow a movement as a social movement, and that education will be the battleground the structural test, one of the structural tests of whether or not America is even possible as a country of equity. And to the day he died, Bob Moses was never one who deluded himself into believing that full American equality was inevitable. When they asked him last summer, and a lot of interviews, they asked him, well, what do you think about what's going on? These young people in the streets, does it remind you of the 60s? He said, yeah. He said, what do you think is going to happen? He said, well, classic Bob Moses. It could go either way. It could go backward or forward. I guess we'll see. Which means it's up to us.